The porcelain bowl swallowed Emma's phone with a violent splash, 3 years of memories disappearing into the churning water. Madison's laughter echoed off the bathroom tiles like breaking glass as she hit the flush handle again, watching the device spin helplessly in the vortex. Emma's scream tore through Lincoln High's second-floor restroom, raw and desperate, as her grandmother's final voicemails vanished forever. That's when something snapped inside the quiet girl who'd spent 2 years invisible, something that had been sleeping since the funeral, something her grandmother had spent 15 years teaching her to control. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Emma Chun had learned to count heartbeats the way other kids learned multiplication tables. Grandmother Mei had started the lessons when Emma was 5, small hands wrapped around even smaller fists, teaching her that breath was the foundation of everything that mattered. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and somewhere in that rhythm, find the stillness that lived between fury and action. The old woman had arrived from Taiwan with calloused knuckles and stories she never fully told, speaking of tournaments won and masters honored, but always ending with the same warning: true strength reveals itself only when protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The cancer took Grandmother Mei 3 months ago, slow and merciless despite every treatment Emma's mother could afford on a nurse's salary. Emma had held that same weathered hand through the final weeks, recording every story, every lesson, every whispered piece of advice on her phone. The device became her sanctuary, filled with voice messages that started with practical wisdom about footwork and breathing, then gradually transformed into something more precious, a dying woman's desperate attempt to leave her granddaughter, prepared for a world that would test her in ways she couldn't imagine. Lincoln High School sprawled across 15 acres of suburban perfection, where manicured lawns met glass corridors and every surface gleamed with the promise of academic excellence. Emma's mother had sacrificed their savings for the transfer. Here, believing that a prestigious school meant better opportunities, safer hallways, teachers who actually cared. She couldn't have known that privilege created its own predators, or that her quiet daughter would become prey the moment she walked through those polished doors wearing second-hand clothes and carrying a phone held together with electrical tape. Madison Torres ruled the sophomore class with the casual cruelty that comes naturally to those born into power. Her father owned half the commercial real estate in town. Her mother chaired the school board, and Madison wielded both facts like weapons against anyone who dared exist in her orbit without permission. Tall and sharp-featured, she moved through the hallways with her constant shadows: Chloe Martinez, whose loyalty was purchased with designer handbags and weekend trips to her family's lake house, and Aiden Walsh, a linebacker who found humor in other people's pain and validation in Madison's approval. Emma's first mistake was sitting at their usual lunch table. She hadn't known it belonged to anyone, had simply chosen the empty seats by the window where she could watch the courtyard, while listening to her grandmother's recorded stories through one earbud. The approach had been swift and surgical. Madison's voice, honey-sweet with underlying venom, asking if Emma was lost, if someone had given her permission to sit there, if she understood how things worked at schools like this. Emma had apologized, gathered her things, and moved without argument, but the damage was done. She'd shown weakness, and Madison never forgot weakness. The harassment started small. Emma's locker mysteriously jammed every morning, forcing her to arrive at first period already flustered and late. Her gym clothes disappeared regularly, replaced with items 2 sizes too small or stained with substances that reeked of the cafeteria dumpster. Notes appeared in her textbooks, carefully crafted insults about her clothes, her accent when she occasionally spoke her grandmother's language, her habit of talking to herself in the corners of the library. But the cruelest attacks targeted the one thing Emma treasured most. They mocked her constant attachment to her phone, calling her addicted, pathetic, desperate for connection she'd never find in real life. Emma endured it all with the patience her grandmother had taught her, counting breaths through each humiliation, finding the eye of the storm where emotions couldn't touch her. Violence is the last choice, Mei's voice reminded her from beyond the grave. A true martial artist seeks harmony, not conflict. Strength without wisdom becomes mere brutality, and brutality serves no one. So Emma practiced her forms in private, shadowboxing in her bedroom while her mother worked double shifts, maintaining the discipline that had once earned her junior championships in tournaments her new classmates would never know existed. The phone became her lifeline during those endless weeks of isolation. Between classes, she'd slip into empty stairwells or forgotten corners of the building, pressing the device to her ear like a seashell that held the ocean of her grandmother's wisdom. Mei's voice would wash over her, sometimes speaking in English, sometimes in the Mandarin that felt like coming home, always offering exactly the guidance Emma needed. "Remember, little tiger," the recordings would say. "The bamboo bends but never breaks because it knows when to yield and when to stand firm. Your time will come, but not until you understand the difference between fighting for pride and fighting for purpose." What Emma didn't realize was that Madison had been watching, studying, planning something that would finally break the quiet girl who refused to properly crumble under pressure. The bathroom trap had been weeks in the making, timed perfectly. For the moment when Emma would be most vulnerable, most isolated, most likely to finally provide the dramatic breakdown Madison craved for her social media followers. But Madison had never learned to count heartbeats, had never understood that some people's stillness wasn't weakness, but preparation, and had no idea that she was about to discover why Grandmother Mei had spent 15 years teaching her granddaughter that the most dangerous fighters were always the ones nobody saw coming. The custodial closet on the 3rd floor had become Emma's refuge, a forgotten space where industrial cleaners masked the scent of teenage cruelty and fluorescent bulbs hummed their mechanical lullabies. She sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, eyes closed, trying to summon her grandmother's voice from memory since the phone now lay somewhere in Lincoln High's ancient plumbing system. The breathing exercises felt hollow without Mei's recorded guidance, like trying to perform a dance without music, but Emma forced herself through the motions anyway. 4 counts in, hold for 4, out for 4, searching for the center that had always steadied her before. The door creaked open, and Emma's eyes snapped wide, expecting Madison's triumphant face or a teacher demanding explanations. Instead, she found herself looking at Maria Santos, the school's head custodian, whose weathered hands held a steaming cup of coffee, and whose dark eyes carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much to be surprised by teenage warfare. The older woman stepped inside without invitation, settling her sturdy frame against a shelf of disinfectant bottles, and Emma noticed how her movements carried an odd precision, like someone whose body remembered lessons learned long ago. Maria sipped her coffee in comfortable silence, studying Emma with the sort of patient attention that made the girl feel simultaneously exposed and protected. When she finally spoke, her voice carried traces of an accent that Emma couldn't quite place, something that suggested journeys across oceans and experiences that belonged in different decades. She mentioned seeing Emma's breathing exercises, recognizing the posture, the focused concentration that spoke of formal training rather than casual meditation picked up from internet videos. The conversation that followed unfolded like origami, each revelation carefully folded into the next. Maria had spent her youth in the Philippines, where her grandfather taught traditional martial arts to children whose families needed them to be strong. She recognized the specific style of breathing Emma practiced, the particular way she held her shoulders, the unconscious positioning of her feet even while sitting. More importantly, she recognized the look of someone carrying grief. Like a stone, polishing it smooth with repetition until it became both burden and comfort. Emma found herself talking, words spilling out in a flood she hadn't expected. She told Maria about her grandmother's death, about the phone and its precious cargo of recorded wisdom, about Madison's calculated cruelty, and the way Lincoln High felt like navigating a minefield where every step might trigger an explosion. Maria listened without judgment, occasionally nodding, never offering empty reassurances or meaningless platitudes about things getting better. When Emma finished, Maria shared her own story with equal honesty. She spoke of leaving the Philippines as a young woman, carrying nothing but her grandfather's teachings and a determination to build something better for herself in America. She'd worked her way through college, earned a degree in education, even taught for several years before budget cuts and politics drove her back to custodial work. But she'd never stopped practicing, never forgotten the lessons about inner strength and the responsibility that came with possessing skills others lacked. The connection between them solidified when Maria mentioned her grandfather's favorite saying, spoken in Tagalog first, then translated: "The strongest trees grow in the harshest winds, but they survive because their roots run deeper than the storm can reach." Emma felt her grandmother's presence in those words, as if May had somehow arranged this meeting from beyond the grave, ensuring her granddaughter wouldn't face the coming trials alone. Over the following days, Maria became Emma's unofficial guardian angel, appearing at crucial moments when Madison's harassment escalated. She never intervened directly, understanding that would only make things worse, but her presence served as a subtle deterrent, a reminder that someone was watching, someone cared. More importantly, she began sharing her own knowledge during their brief encounters, offering corrections to Emma's form, suggestions for maintaining focus under pressure, wisdom about choosing battles worth fighting. The first real test came during gym class, where Madison had orchestrated what appeared to be an innocent game of dodgeball, but was actually a carefully planned assault. Emma found herself the primary target, surrounded by Madison's allies who threw with vicious accuracy, aiming for her face, her stomach, anywhere that might cause maximum pain and humiliation. The gymnasium erupted with laughter each time Emma stumbled or cried out. But something strange began happening as the assault continued. Instead of breaking down, Emma started moving differently. Her grandmother's training, dormant but never forgotten, began asserting itself through muscle memory and instinct. She started anticipating the throws, reading body language and eye movements the way May had taught her to read opponents in the ring. Her dodges became fluid, almost dance-like, and several balls that should have connected sailed harmlessly past their target. The laughter in the gymnasium gradually shifted from cruel amusement to confused murmuring as students realized the quiet girl was making her attackers look foolish. Madison's frustration was evident in the way she threw harder, aimed meaner, recruited more players to her side. But Emma had found her rhythm now, moving with the grace her grandmother had spent years cultivating, each evasion a small victory that built toward something larger. When the gym teacher finally called time, Emma stood in the center of the court, barely breathing hard while her attackers panted from exertion, their carefully planned humiliation having backfired spectacularly. The real confrontation came later that day in the hallway between classes. Madison cornered Emma near the stairwell. Her usual entourage expanded to include several older students, whose participation suggested this was meant to be more than verbal intimidation. Madison's voice carried clearly through the corridor as she accused Emma of showing off, of thinking she was better than everyone else, of needing to be taught her proper place in the school's hierarchy. Emma tried to walk away, remembering her grandmother's warnings about pride leading to unnecessary conflict. But Chloe and Aiden blocked her path while Madison continued her verbal assault. The accusations grew more personal, more vicious, eventually targeting Emma's family, her mother's multiple jobs, her grandmother's death, all delivered with the surgical precision of someone who'd studied her victim's vulnerabilities and knew exactly where to cut deepest. The breaking point came when Madison suggested that maybe Emma's grandmother had died to escape the shame, of having such a pathetic granddaughter, that maybe the old woman had seen what a failure Emma would become, and chosen death over disappointment. The words hit Emma like physical blows, but instead of crushing her, they ignited something that had been building for weeks. Her vision sharpened, her breathing steadied, and for the first time since arriving at Lincoln High, she felt truly present in her own body. What happened next lasted maybe 10 seconds, but would be replayed in cell phone videos for years to come. Aiden reached for Emma's backpack, probably intending to dump its contents or search for something to destroy, but his hand never made contact. Emma's response was instinctive, a simple deflection and redirection that sent the much larger boy stumbling into the wall with enough force to rattle the nearby lockers. Chloe tried to grab Emma from behind, but found herself on the floor before she understood how she'd gotten there. Emma's movements too quick and precise to follow with untrained eyes. Madison backed away, real fear replacing her earlier confidence. But Emma wasn't pursuing. Instead, she stood perfectly still in the center of the hallway, surrounded by her would-be attackers who now lay groaning on the linoleum, her own breathing calm and controlled despite what had just occurred. Students who'd gathered to watch the expected beatdown now stared in stunned silence, their phones recording something none of them had anticipated. Emma looked directly at Madison for the first time since arriving at Lincoln High, her voice steady and clear when she finally spoke. She suggested that Madison might want to reconsider her approach to conflict resolution, that perhaps targeting people based on assumptions about their weakness wasn't the safest strategy in a world where appearances could be deceiving. Then, she picked up her backpack, stepped carefully around her fallen classmates, and walked to her next class as if nothing unusual had happened. The video went viral within hours, spreading through Lincoln High's social networks like wildfire through dry grass. Emma Chun, the quiet girl who'd spent months invisible, suddenly found herself the center of attention she'd never wanted. Students, who'd previously walked past her without acknowledgement, now stared openly in the hallways, whispering theories about where she'd learned to move like that, speculating about hidden training and secret backgrounds. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The footage, shot from multiple angles, showed her defensive moves with crystal clarity, replaying the moment when two much larger students found themselves on the ground before they understood what had happened. Principal Morrison called Emma to his office the following morning, his usually stern demeanor replaced by something approaching nervous respect. He was a thin man who'd spent 30 years navigating the politics of public education, and Emma could see him calculating the potential complications of disciplining a student who'd clearly acted in self-defense while being recorded by dozens of witnesses. The conversation was brief and careful, focused more on Emma's well-being than any disciplinary action, though Morrison did suggest she might want to consider joining the school's martial arts club to channel her obvious skills in a more constructive direction. Emma politely declined, explaining that her training was personal, tied to family traditions he wouldn't understand. What she didn't mention was that no school club could replicate the depth of what her grandmother had taught her, the way physical technique intertwined with philosophy and emotional discipline. Mei's teachings were about more than self-defense. They were about understanding the responsibility that came with possessing the ability to harm others, about finding strength in restraint rather than dominance. The attention brought unexpected complications. Students approached her constantly. Now, some seeking friendship they'd never offered before, others hoping to witness another demonstration of her abilities. Emma found their sudden interest exhausting, preferring the anonymity she'd lost, but she also noticed how the atmosphere around her had shifted. Madison's usual hunting grounds became neutral territory when Emma was present, as if her mere proximity created a protective bubble that extended to other potential victims. Maria Santos watched these developments with the knowing eye of someone who'd seen similar transformations before. During their increasingly frequent conversations in the custodial closet, she helped Emma process the strange burden of visibility, sharing stories about her own grandfather's struggles with reputation and expectation in the Philippines. He'd been known throughout their province as a master, Maria explained, and that knowledge had made every interaction charged with potential challenge or request for demonstration. The parallels weren't lost on Emma, but her situation felt more complicated. Her grandmother had taught her that true martial arts were about invisible victories, preventing conflicts before they required physical intervention, protecting people who never knew they'd been in danger. The hallway incident had been necessary, but messy, revealing her capabilities in a way that made future discretion impossible. Now everyone knew what she could do, which meant every future encounter would be viewed through that lens. Madison's response to her public humiliation was strategic withdrawal followed by careful reconnaissance. She stopped the direct confrontations but began studying Emma with predatory patience, looking for weaknesses, gathering intelligence about family background and personal vulnerabilities. Emma noticed the shift, recognized it as the calm before a more devastating storm, but found herself oddly grateful for the temporary peace it provided. During this interlude, Emma's relationship with her mother deepened in unexpected ways. Mrs. Chun had always known about her daughter's training with Grandmother Mei, but she'd viewed it as cultural tradition rather than practical skill. The phone call from Principal Morrison changed that perspective dramatically. Suddenly, Emma's quiet discipline and unusual composure made sense in new contexts, and her mother began asking questions about what else Mei had taught her daughter during those years of private lessons. These conversations revealed layers of family history Emma had never fully understood. Her mother spoke about Mei's youth in Taiwan, about competitions won and respect earned in circles where martial arts were serious business rather than recreational activity. She shared stories about why Mei had been so insistent on teaching Emma, about the old woman's belief that the world would test her granddaughter in ways that required more than academic knowledge or social grace. The revelation that affected Emma most deeply was learning about her grandmother's documented achievements. Mei had been regionally famous in her youth, holder of multiple championship titles, respected enough that martial arts schools across 3 provinces sought her endorsement. She'd immigrated to America not to escape that legacy, but to ensure it continued through her granddaughter, believing that Emma would need every skill Mei could provide to navigate a future the old woman sensed would be challenging. Emma began practicing with renewed intensity, using the school's empty gymnasium after hours with Maria's help in accessing the space. The custodian had keys to every room and understood the value of private training time, often staying late, to ensure Emma had uninterrupted access to proper facilities. These sessions became meditation in motion, Emma working through forms and combinations while processing the weight of her grandmother's expectations and her own emerging sense of responsibility. The practices also served as preparation for whatever Madison was planning. Emma could feel the other girl's attention like pressure against her skin, constant and calculating. Madison had too much pride to let the hallway incident stand without response, and too much power within the school's social structure to simply accept her reduced influence. Something larger was coming, something designed to restore her position. While devastating Emma's newfound confidence, the warning signs emerged gradually. Emma noticed changes in patterns, shifts in the way Madison's followers positioned themselves during classes, new faces joining their group who studied Emma with professional interest. These weren't typical high school bullies motivated by peer pressure or casual cruelty. Madison was recruiting students who understood conflict as strategy rather than emotion, who could plan and execute something more sophisticated than random harassment. Maria confirmed Emma's suspicions during one of their evening conversations. Her position as custodian provided unique insight into student behavior, access to discarded notes, and overheard conversations that revealed more than teenagers realized. Madison was indeed planning something significant, though the specifics remained unclear. What Maria had discovered suggested coordination between multiple groups, timing linked to upcoming school events, and resources being gathered for purposes she couldn't quite decipher. The knowledge created a strange tension in Emma's daily routine. She remained alert without appearing paranoid, watchful without seeming suspicious, maintaining the facade of normal teenage life while preparing for confrontation she couldn't predict or prevent. Her grandmother's training had included lessons about patience under pressure, about maintaining calm when danger approached from unknown directions, but applying those principles in high school corridors felt surreal. Emma's academic performance actually improved during this period of heightened awareness. The mental discipline required for constant vigilance translated into sharper focus during classes, better retention of information, more efficient study. Habits. Teachers noticed the change, commenting on her increased participation and improved test scores, unaware that their quiet student was channeling nervous energy into intellectual achievement while monitoring threats from multiple directions. Simultaneously, the irony wasn't lost on Emma that her grandmother's death had led to circumstances that demanded everything Mei had tried to teach her. The old woman's recorded lessons, now lost in Lincoln High's plumbing system, had prepared Emma for exactly this type of situation, outnumbered, under surveillance, facing opponents who had advantages in resources and institutional support. Mei's voice echoed in Emma's memory during moments of doubt, reminding her that true strength revealed itself not in dominance but in protection, not in defeating enemies but in preserving what mattered most. As days passed without incident, Emma began to wonder if she'd misjudged Madison's intentions. Perhaps the public humiliation had been sufficient deterrent. Perhaps the other girl's pride was less resilient than Emma had assumed. The possibility of genuine peace felt almost foreign after months of constant tension, but Emma allowed herself to hope that her grandmother's teachings about strength through restraint had actually prevented further conflict rather than merely delaying it. This cautious optimism made Madison's final gambit all the more devastating when it finally came. Perfectly timed and precisely calculated to strike at the one vulnerability Emma hadn't adequately protected. The Student Talent Showcase arrived with the kind of fanfare Lincoln High reserved for events that impressed donors and appealed to college admissions committees. Banners decorated the main corridor, volunteer sign-up sheets appeared on bulletin boards, and the auditorium buzzed with preparation for performances ranging from classical piano to contemporary dance. Emma watched the excitement with detached interest, having no intention of participating but curious about the elaborate production taking shape around her. Madison's involvement in the showcase planning surprised no one. Her family's donations ensured prominent placement in school activities, and she'd volunteered to coordinate the backstage logistics with characteristic enthusiasm. Emma noticed how Madison's team had expanded beyond her usual circle, incorporating students from drama club, tech crew, and even some academic honor society members who rarely associated with social hierarchies. The collaboration looked innocent enough, but Emma's heightened awareness detected something calculated in the way Madison positioned herself at the center of every planning meeting. The invitation came through official channels delivered by Mrs. Patterson, the guidance counselor, who explained that several teachers had recommended Emma for a special presentation about cultural traditions and family heritage. The showcase organizers wanted to include diverse perspectives, Mrs. Patterson said, and Emma's background offered unique opportunities to educate her classmates about Asian martial arts history and philosophy. The request seemed genuine, supported by faculty enthusiasm and legitimate educational objectives that made refusal appear churlish. Emma's instinctive reluctance clashed with pressure from unexpected sources. Her mother expressed pride at the recognition, viewing it as validation of Mei's cultural legacy and Emma's own achievements. Maria Santos encouraged participation as well, suggesting that sharing her grandmother's teachings might honor the old woman's memory while demonstrating the positive aspects of martial arts to students who only understood violence through entertainment. Media. Even Principal Morrison mentioned the presentation during a chance hallway encounter, praising Emma's potential contribution to the school's commitment to multicultural education. The preparation meetings revealed Madison's sophisticated manipulation. She presented herself as genuinely interested in Emma's cultural background, asking thoughtful questions about martial arts, philosophy, and expressing admiration for the discipline required to achieve such skill levels. Her research was thorough, references to specific traditions and techniques that demonstrated serious study rather than superficial curiosity. Emma found herself cautiously impressed by Madison's apparent transformation, wondering if the hallway incident had genuinely prompted self-reflection and personal growth. Madison's questions gradually became more personal, focusing on Emma's training history and the relationship with her grandmother. She expressed sympathy about Mei's death, asking how Emma maintained connection to her grandmother's teachings without direct guidance. Emma mentioned the recorded lessons, describing how Mei had created audio diaries of techniques and philosophy to ensure nothing would be lost. Madison listened with apparent fascination, encouraging Emma to share specific examples of her grandmother's wisdom. The conversation about the lost phone felt natural within this context. Emma explained how Madison's earlier actions had destroyed years of recorded memories, describing the grief of losing her grandmother's voice, along with practical guidance about advanced techniques. Madison's response seemed genuinely remorseful, acknowledging the cruelty of her previous behavior and expressing desire to make amends. She suggested the talent showcase presentation could serve as tribute to Mei's legacy, allowing Emma to share her grandmother's teachings with the entire school community. Emma's agreement to participate came gradually, each conversation building trust while addressing her concerns about public exposure. Madison assured her that the presentation would be respectful and educational, focused on martial arts as cultural expression rather than combat demonstration. The technical requirements seemed reasonable. Emma would speak briefly about her grandmother's background, demonstrate some basic forms to illustrate different styles, and conclude with philosophical principles that guided traditional practice. Madison's team would handle lighting, sound, and stage management to ensure professional presentation quality. The rehearsals took place during lunch periods and after school hours, giving Emma opportunities to practice her presentation, while Madison's crew tested equipment and refined staging. Emma appreciated the attention to detail, the way Madison seemed committed to creating something meaningful rather than exploitative. The other students involved appeared genuinely interested in learning, asking respectful questions about technique and history that suggested authentic curiosity rather than voyeuristic fascination. Emma's guard lowered incrementally as the showcase date approached. Madison's behavior remained consistently supportive, and the broader planning team treated Emma with respect that felt unprecedented at Lincoln High. For the first time since arriving at the school, Emma experienced something approaching belonging, as if her unique background was finally being valued rather than marginalized. The sensation was intoxicating enough to override her grandmother's warnings about trusting too easily or assuming good intentions from former enemies. The day of the showcase arrived with typical October weather, crisp air and brilliant sunshine that seemed to promise good fortune. Emma spent extra time on her appearance, wanting to honor her grandmother's memory with dignity and grace. She wore traditional clothing Mei had given her, simple but elegant garments that carried cultural significance while allowing freedom of movement. The fabric held faint traces of her grandmother's favorite incense, creating an almost spiritual connection to the woman whose legacy Emma was about to share. The morning classes passed in a blur of nervous anticipation and final preparations. Emma reviewed her presentation notes, practiced her demonstration forms, and mentally rehearsed the philosophical explanation she'd planned to share. Madison checked in periodically, offering encouragement and handling last-minute logistical details with impressive efficiency. The technical crew seemed professional and prepared, testing microphones and camera angles to ensure optimal recording quality for the school's promotional materials. Emma's first hint of trouble came during lunch, when she overheard fragments of conversation between Madison and Aiden that didn't match the supportive tone of recent weeks. They were discussing timing and positioning in ways that seemed unrelated to talent showcase logistics, using coded language that suggested hidden agendas. Emma strained to hear more, but the conversation ended abruptly when Madison noticed her presence and switched to enthusiastic discussion about afternoon rehearsal schedules. The final rehearsal proceeded smoothly, with Emma running through her presentation while the tech crew made adjustments to lighting and sound levels. Madison praised her performance, suggesting minor modifications to maximize impact and ensure clear visibility for the audience. Emma noticed additional equipment being installed, cameras positioned at unusual angles and recording devices that seemed excessive for a high school talent showcase. But Madison explained them as documentation for the school's diversity initiative and potential college recruitment materials. The hours before the evening performance crawled by with agonizing slowness. Emma tried to occupy herself with homework and meditation exercises, but nervous energy made concentration difficult. She kept thinking about her grandmother, imagining Mei's pride at seeing her granddaughter share their family's traditions with respectful audience. The phone calls and text messages from her mother, full of excitement and encouragement, added emotional weight to the evening's significance. Emma arrived at school early, hoping to review her presentation one final time and center herself before the audience gathered. The auditorium was empty, except for tech crew members making final adjustments, and Emma took advantage of the solitude to practice her forms on the actual stage. The movements felt smooth and confident, muscle memory guiding her through sequences Mei had taught years earlier, and Emma allowed herself to believe the evening would honor her grandmother's legacy appropriately. Madison appeared as Emma finished her practice session, carrying a small package she claimed contained a replacement microphone for better audio quality. She seemed more energetic than usual, almost vibrating with anticipation that she attributed to excitement about the evening's success. Emma noticed other students arriving early, taking seats throughout the auditorium in patterns that seemed oddly strategic, but Madison explained their presence as enthusiasm from classmates who'd heard about the presentation through social media promotion. The final betrayal began 30 minutes before showtime, when Madison suggested Emma might want to freshen up in the nearby restroom before the audience filled the auditorium. The suggestion seemed reasonable, even thoughtful, and Emma agreed without suspicion. She gathered her things, including her water bottle and the small bag containing her grandmother's jewelry that she'd planned to wear during the presentation, and headed toward the bathroom Madison had indicated. The restroom was empty when Emma entered, which seemed strange given the approaching event time, but she attributed the solitude to most people being busy with final preparations. She was washing her hands when she heard footsteps entering behind her, multiple sets that moved with purposeful coordination rather than casual bathroom usage. Emma looked up to see Madison in the mirror, flanked by Chloe and 3 older students Emma didn't recognize, their expressions carrying predatory anticipation that made her grandmother's danger instincts flare to immediate attention. Madison's smile carried the sharp satisfaction of a hunter who'd finally cornered her prey after months of patient stalking. The bathroom door clicked shut behind the group, and Emma heard the distinctive sound of someone sliding the exterior lock into place. Her water bottle slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering against the tile floor as 5 sets of hostile eyes focused on her with laser intensity. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made Madison's face look skeletal, predatory in ways Emma had never fully comprehended until this moment. The setup had been masterful, Emma realized with growing horror. Every conversation, every seemingly genuine interaction, every moment of apparent reconciliation had been carefully orchestrated to bring her to exactly this place at exactly this time. Madison had studied her target with methodical precision, identifying vulnerabilities and crafting the perfect trap using Emma's own desire to honor her grandmother's memory as the bait. The talent showcase had never been about cultural appreciation or educational opportunity. It had been about creating circumstances where Emma would be isolated, vulnerable, and completely at Madison's mercy. The older students Emma didn't recognize moved with practiced coordination, spreading out to block any potential escape routes, while maintaining positions that would allow them to intervene if necessary. These weren't random recruits from Madison's usual social circle. They carried themselves like people accustomed to violence, comfortable with intimidation tactics that suggested experience beyond typical high school drama. Emma's trained eye cataloged their positions automatically, noting stance variations that indicated different fighting backgrounds, different levels of skill and commitment. Madison reached into her jacket pocket with theatrical slowness, withdrawing Emma's phone. With triumphant flourish, the device looked impossibly small in Madison's manicured hands. 3 years of irreplaceable memories reduced to a fragile rectangle of metal and glass that represented everything Emma had left of her grandmother's voice. Madison held it up, like a trophy, rotating it slowly so Emma could see every familiar scratch and crack, every piece of electrical tape that held the aging device together through sheer determination and desperate need. The explanation that followed was delivered with clinical detachment, Madison's voice carrying the satisfied tone of someone revealing a particularly clever magic trick. She described how simple it had been to retrieve the phone from the school's plumbing system, how maintenance staff had been easily convinced to search the pipes, using stories about accidentally dropped jewelry of sentimental value. The device had suffered water damage but remained functional enough to access its contents, which Madison had spent weeks cataloging with meticulous attention to detail. Madison began reading excerpts from Mei's recordings with exaggerated emotion, her voice dripping with mockery as she recited the old woman's words about inner strength and moral responsibility. She paused between quotes to offer commentary, turning profound wisdom into cruel comedy through tone and inflection alone. Emma watched her grandmother's legacy being desecrated in real time, each mocking interpretation feeling like physical blows against her chest. But she forced herself to remain still, remembering Mei's teachings about patience in the face of provocation. The performance continued for several agonizing minutes, Madison savoring each moment of Emma's visible pain while her audience of accomplices provided appropriately appreciative laughter. They mocked Mei's accent, her philosophical approach to martial arts, her obvious love for the granddaughter she'd tried so desperately to prepare for exactly this type of situation. Emma's breathing became carefully controlled, each inhale and exhale measured against the rising fury that threatened to overwhelm her grandmother's teachings about restraint and proportional response. Madison's voice shifted to false sympathy as she described how pathetic it was that Emma needed recordings to remember her own grandmother, suggesting that truly loving relationships left deeper impressions than electronic dependencies. She wondered aloud whether Mei had known how weak her granddaughter would prove to be, whether the old woman had died disappointed in Emma's inability to apply her teachings in practical situations. The words were chosen for maximum psychological damage, each accusation designed to undermine Emma's sense of self-worth and connection to her family legacy. The moment Emma had been dreading arrived when Madison announced her intention to delete every recording to erase Mei's voice permanently while forcing Emma to watch helplessly. Madison made a show of accessing the phone's menu system, navigating toward the stored audio files with deliberate slowness that maximized Emma's anticipation and dread. She paused at each step to offer Emma opportunities to beg for mercy, to humiliate herself in exchange for preserving fragments of her grandmother's wisdom. But Emma remained silent despite the agony of watching her last connection to Mei being systematically destroyed. When Madison finally reached for the toilet handle, intending to complete her revenge by destroying the phone entirely, Emma felt something fundamental shift inside her consciousness. The careful barriers her grandmother had taught her to maintain between emotion and action dissolved completely, replaced by crystalline clarity that made every detail in the bathroom visible with supernatural intensity. She could hear individual heartbeats, smell fear beneath aggressive postures, see micro-expressions that revealed her opponent's psychological states with perfect accuracy. Emma's movement began before Madison completed her motion toward the toilet, a flowing transition from apparent helplessness to devastating efficiency that caught everyone present completely off guard. Her first target was the student positioned nearest the door, a senior whose overconfident stance suggested he'd never faced serious opposition. Emma's hand struck his solar plexus with surgical precision, exactly the technique her grandmother had demonstrated countless times, and he collapsed without making a sound beyond a soft whoosh of expelled air. The second opponent reacted faster, reaching for Emma with hands that showed calluses suggesting boxing experience. But Emma was already moving past his guard with footwork that would have made Mei proud. She redirected his momentum with minimal contact, using his own strength against him in a way that sent him crashing into the sink with enough force to crack the porcelain. The sound echoed through the bathroom like gunshots, sudden and sharp, and final in ways that made everyone present understand the situation had fundamentally changed. Madison dropped the phone in shock, her careful composure finally cracking as she watched two larger, older students neutralized in seconds by someone she'd consistently underestimated. Emma caught the device before it hit the water, her reflexes operating on levels that transcended conscious thought, while simultaneously avoiding a desperate grab from Chloe that left the other girl clutching empty air. Emma's counterattack was gentle by comparison, just enough force to send Chloe stumbling backward into the wall without causing serious injury. The remaining two opponents hesitated, suddenly uncertain about odds they'd previously considered overwhelming. Emma used their moment of doubt to establish proper positioning, placing herself between the threats and the door while maintaining visual contact with all potential attackers. Her stance was textbook perfect, weight distributed optimally, hands positioned for either offensive or defensive techniques depending on their next moves. For the first time since entering the bathroom, Emma spoke, her voice carrying absolute calm despite the violence that had just occurred. She offered them a simple choice: leave immediately and forget this encounter had ever happened, or discover exactly why her grandmother had spent 15 years preparing her for situations involving multiple attackers with malicious intent. Emma's tone carried no threat or bravado, just factual information delivered with the same clinical detachment Madison had used earlier. The difference was that Emma's words carried the weight of demonstrated capability, while Madison's had relied purely on social positioning and intimidation tactics. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Students who'd entered the bathroom confident in their numerical advantage now found themselves facing someone whose skills clearly exceeded their collective abilities. Emma hadn't just defeated two opponents. She'd made it look effortless, almost casual, as if dispensing with trained fighters was simply another routine task requiring minimal effort. The casual competence was more terrifying than obvious aggression would have been, suggesting reserves of capability they couldn't begin to estimate. Madison's final desperate gambit involved grabbing the phone again and threatening to smash it against the floor, unless Emma surrendered immediately. The attempt at regaining control through hostage tactics might have worked against someone whose training was purely technical, but Mei had taught Emma about psychological warfare as well as physical techniques. Emma's response was to laugh, a sound so genuinely amused that it completely undermined Madison's position more effectively than any threat could have accomplished. Emma explained that the phone's contents had been automatically backed up to cloud storage services that Madison couldn't access or destroy, that every recording and photograph existed in multiple secure locations beyond the reach of high school revenge fantasies. The revelation that her entire elaborate scheme had been pointless from the beginning broke something fundamental in Madison's psyche, reducing her from confident predator to confused child clutching a useless prop in a game. She'd never really understood. The bathroom door's lock disengaged with a soft click, and Maria Santos entered with the calm authority of someone who'd been monitoring the situation from the beginning. Behind her came Principal Morrison, 2 security guards, and a police officer, whose presence suggested this confrontation had been anticipated and prepared for. Emma noticed recording equipment in Maria's hands, cameras that had captured audio and video evidence of everything that had occurred, ensuring no amount of family influence could obscure the truth of what had happened. Maria's explanation revealed the scope of the investigation that had been quietly proceeding for weeks. Emma's bathroom encounter wasn't an isolated incident, but the culmination of a pattern of harassment that had targeted numerous students over multiple years. Security footage, witness statements, and digital evidence had been systematically gathered, building a comprehensive case against Madison and her network of accomplices. Emma's willingness to participate in the talent showcase had provided the perfect opportunity to document Madison's methods while protecting future victims. The arrests were conducted with professional efficiency. Each student read their rights while being secured with restraints that reflected the seriousness of charges they would face. Madison's protests about family connections and financial influence fell on deaf ears as Principal Morrison explained how federal civil rights violations transcended local political considerations. The systematic targeting of students based on ethnic background and economic status qualified as hate crimes under current legislation, carrying penalties that no amount of money or influence could eliminate. Emma watched the proceedings with detached interest, her adrenaline beginning to fade as the immediate threat was neutralized. The phone in her hands felt heavier than its actual weight, not because of the device itself, but because of what its preservation represented. Her grandmother's voice would continue echoing through Emma's life, offering guidance and wisdom whenever she needed connection to her family's legacy. Madison's attempt to destroy that connection had failed completely, leaving Emma stronger, rather than diminished. The aftermath unfolded over subsequent weeks as Lincoln High School faced scrutiny from media outlets, civil rights organizations, and federal investigators interested in systematic harassment patterns within educational institutions. Emma found herself thrust into a spotlight she'd never sought, her story becoming a symbol of resilience in the face of institutional failure and social persecution. Speaking engagements at other schools followed, opportunities to share her experience, while advocating for stronger protections for vulnerable students. The transformation from invisible victim to public advocate felt surreal, but Emma embraced the responsibility with the same dedication her grandmother had brought to martial arts training. She spoke about the importance of recognizing harassment patterns, about institutions taking proactive measures to protect students, about the difference between individual bullying incidents and systematic campaigns designed to drive targeted populations away from educational opportunities. Her presentations combined practical advice with emotional authenticity that resonated with audiences ranging from middle school students to state legislators. Maria Santos became Emma's unofficial mentor in this new role, helping her navigate media requests and speaking opportunities while maintaining focus on educational objectives rather than personal publicity. Their relationship deepened into genuine friendship as Emma learned about Maria's own advocacy work, her efforts to support immigrant families facing discrimination, her quiet but persistent campaign to improve working conditions for custodial staff throughout the district. Emma realized that heroism often took invisible forms, that the most important battles were fought by people whose names never appeared in headlines. The legal proceedings against Madison and her accomplices concluded, with guilty verdicts and sentences that reflected the severity of their crimes. Madison received juvenile detention and mandatory counseling, her college prospects permanently damaged by felony convictions that would follow her for life. The older students faced adult charges that carried potentially more serious consequences, their athletic scholarships and academic opportunities evaporating as institutions distanced themselves from convicted criminals. Emma felt no satisfaction in their punishment, understanding that justice served victims rather than providing revenge against perpetrators. Her focus remained on preventing similar situations, on creating environments where students like herself could pursue education without fear of systematic harassment. She worked with school administrators to develop policies addressing cultural sensitivity, established mentorship programs connecting isolated students with supportive adults, and created documentation systems that would help identify harassment patterns before they escalated to violence. The talent showcase was eventually held, restructured as a genuine celebration of student diversity rather than a platform for exploitation. Emma participated by choice this time, sharing her grandmother's teachings with an audience that appreciated their cultural significance and philosophical depth. The presentation was recorded for educational purposes, becoming part of curriculum materials used in districts throughout the state to promote understanding between different cultural communities. Emma's relationship with her mother evolved as well, deepened by shared understanding of challenges they'd both faced as immigrants navigating American social systems. Mrs. Chun began attending Emma's speaking engagements, adding her own perspective about parental concerns and family dynamics to discussions about student safety. Their conversations about Mei became richer and more nuanced, exploring the old woman's wisdom from adult perspectives that revealed layers of meaning Emma hadn't previously understood. The phone remained Emma's constant companion, but its significance shifted from desperate clinging to treasured resource. She still listened to her grandmother's recordings regularly, but now she also created her own audio diaries, documenting lessons learned and insights gained through her advocacy work. The device became a bridge between past and future, connecting Mei's traditional wisdom with Emma's contemporary applications of those principles. Lincoln High School implemented comprehensive policy changes that became a model for other institutions facing similar challenges. Anonymous reporting systems, cultural competency training for staff, and zero-tolerance policies for harassment based on ethnic or economic status created safer environments for vulnerable students. Emma served on the committee overseeing these implementations, her experience providing practical insights that complemented administrative perspectives. 1 year after the bathroom confrontation, Emma stood at the podium in the state capitol, addressing legislators about the need for stronger anti-harassment statutes in educational settings. Her testimony combined personal narrative with policy recommendations, demonstrating how individual experiences could inform broader systemic changes. The phone in her pocket contained her grandmother's voice offering encouragement, but Emma no longer needed external validation to know she was honoring Mei's legacy appropriately. The legislation that emerged from those hearings carried Emma's name, formally recognizing her contribution to protecting students' rights to safe educational environments. The designation felt overwhelming, but Emma understood that symbols mattered, that visible recognition of victims' experiences could inspire others to speak out against injustice. She accepted the honor on behalf of all students who'd suffered in silence, whose stories might never be heard, but whose experiences deserved acknowledgement and protection. Emma's final words to the legislative committee reflected her grandmother's teachings about strength through service, about using personal capabilities to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. She emphasized that martial arts training had given her physical skills, but her grandmother's philosophical guidance had provided the wisdom to use those skills appropriately. True strength, Emma concluded, wasn't about winning fights but about preventing them, wasn't about defeating enemies but about creating communities where enemies couldn't flourish. The standing ovation that followed felt like validation not just of Emma's journey but of her grandmother's vision, proof that Mei's investment in her granddaughter's character had produced exactly the results the old woman had hoped for. Emma touched the phone in her pocket one final time, feeling connected across generations to a legacy that would continue growing through every student she helped, every policy she influenced, every life she touched through her advocacy work. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.